In this sermon today, I woke up about the middle of the night and said, I got to verify this. You wonder something sounds too good to be true. It probably is. So the story that I wanted to use in this sermon turned out that it was fiction. Some of it could be classified as okay, but I'm going to go ahead and use the story, but let you know that it's a fiction story that it goes with the rest of the message I'm giving. So I'm going to change a few names in it, and hopefully it doesn't make it too unbelievable. So, excuse me. Okay, I want to start in Matthew 10, 29 through 31. Matthew 10, 29 through 31. Matthew 10, 29 through 31 tells us, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs of your head are numbered. Fear you not, therefore, you are more valuable than many sparrows." And over in Luke 12 and verse 6, Luke 12 and verse 6 tells us, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings? And not one of them is forgotten before God." You know, we all look for things that we can see that has value. And sometimes going to garage sales or going different places and you say, oh, that's something special. And we purchase it and go home and do some research on it and find out that a $35 piece of furniture or something we bought is worth millions. So I want to tell a story about Bob, who was an avid garage sale enthusiast. And again, this is fiction, the story. But he made it a hobby to cruise the streets, the avenues, and cul-de-sacs of his hometown and hit as many sales as he could. There was always the off chance that on one golden day, one perfect day, he would lay his hand on the elusive great treasure for which he had been searching for years. What would his wife say then about wasting time and money on other people's junk? On a typical day out looking, not long ago, Bob was up with the birds, had his newspapers marked, his address is listed, and was out of the house and on the hunt while most of the town was still asleep. By 10:30 to 11, somewhere around there, he was returning home with a few newly acquired prizes. He had time, though, for one stop, just one more address. But should he? Yes, he would stop briefly, even though prime shopping hours were over. Bob had systematically worked his way to the back of the garage, looking at everything, and was about to make his exit when he first saw it. Although it was partially hidden underneath a tablecloth and an old comforter, the shape was unmistakably. It was a motorcycle. And not only that, it was a Harley, one of the most prized. Obviously, it wasn't a part of the garage sale, and that piqued Bob's interest. "Is this bike for sale?" he asked the homeowner. The man shrugged. "Well, don't rightly see why not." The wife said, "It all has to go. But I warn you, that bike hasn't run since I've had it. Motor's seized up. Won't turn over. Could probably buy yourself a new one with what it's going to cost to fix up that old thing." So Bob nodded patiently. "All the same, how much do you want for it?" You know, I'm sure they'd give me $35 at the scrap metal, at the scrap yard. How does that sound? Bob looked at the rusty old heap. What would his wife say if he brought it home? I know what mine would say. She wants stuff out of the garage right now. But still, to a practical eye, or a practice eye, it had potential. If it didn't run, he could get it shined up as a conversation piece. And he could surely sell it again for more than the $35. Parts alone would be worth more than that. Okay, he said, I'll give you the $35. Can I pick it up tomorrow? So shortly thereafter, the old Harley was occupying space in Bob's wife's garage. After a few weeks of procrastinating, he finally got around to calling Harley Davidson, just to see what a few of the major parts of restoration would run him. He connected with someone on the parts line and asked a few questions. This is where part of the story is true, because there was a motorcycle that was owned, but it didn't have the same marking numbers, that somebody did call in, and that Harley Davidson did end up buying it and restoring it. So why don't you give me the serial numbers, the dealer said, and I will look that up for you. Bob gave him the number. Hold on just a second while I look it up. You know, Bob waited on hold, listening to a 60s rock station piping into the receiver. How appropriate, he thought. After what seemed like an extremely long time, the parts man returned to the line. And just in time, one more song from the 50s and 60s would have driven Bob off the line altogether. I don't know why, I like 50s and 60s songs. Somehow the Harley man sounded different, strange, self-conscious, like something was up, something sleazy. Sir, I'm going to have to call you back, okay? Could I get your full name and address and phone number, please? And what does he need my phone number and address? Bob wondered. But then again, what was the harm? It was no big deal. He probably ended up on some motorcycle mailing list. Bob gave the man what he wanted and hung up. After a few minutes, however, he found himself getting nervous. He regretted giving information about himself over the phone. What if the bike had been involved in a crime of some sort? What if drugs were involved, or murder? What if the bike was stolen? Was he in danger of prosecution? Maybe the police were already on the way, or maybe even the Hells Angels, ready to reclaim his bike and rearrange his face. You know, Bob sweated for a couple of days without hearing back from the Harley shop. But just as his worries were beginning to subside, the phone rang. This time, however, it was the parts man. Bob found himself talking to a Harley executive. The man seemed overly friendly, almost slimy, making Bob feel even more uneasy. And I know the feeling, because Vern, myself, my son, and his wife were all involved in an auto wreck. And they rear-ended the smoker that Vern and I and a few people built. And then the guys, I sent all the pictures and everything in there, and I get a call from the insurance company. Mr. McIver, I got a deal for you. We found you a smoker, and we're going to deliver it this afternoon. I said, like what? Yeah, we found one for $1,800. And I says, no, you didn't, because mine's worth about $25,000. And you're going to pay me $1,800, and you're going to bring it to deliver it? He says, yeah, I'm going to. And I can see how this guy is feeling now, like something's fixing to happen. I'm fixing to get taken to the cleaners. I thought I was getting on it. I think I was Christian, but he knew where I wanted to have him put the suggestion. I was really upset with this guy. And then I got to doing the insulting part. I told him, I says, sir, can you read? Oh, yes, sir, I can read. I says, do you read like grade school kids with pictures? What do you mean? I says, open my file. You have it right there. And you have 42 pictures of my smoker that I sent in, and I've been received because I've been notified that you have them. Now tell me, this $1,800 smoker, is this what you're going to get me? Or is this, or you have to look and see if you can read the pictures? Well, it just says a smoker, and that's what I got you. I says, have your manager call me. I don't think you'll have a job after I get finished with both of you. Anyways, I ended up getting my smoker, but it took a while. And that's the sleaziness of what happens when you're dealing with a high-dollar item. How cheap can I get it from you? But this guy said, listen, Bob, I want you to do something for me, okay? Well, I guess. Bob, I want you to set the receiver down. And don't hang up, and take the seat off the bike and see if anything is written underneath. Would you do that for me, Bob? Anytime people use my name all the time, I know there's something wrong. Because everybody wants to hear their name said. It makes them feel easy, at ease. The man talked like an air traffic controller bringing in an off-course 737. And Bob felt like he was about to hit the wind shear. But he grabbed a screwdriver and did as he was told and returned the phone. Yes, he says, it does have something written there. It's engraved, and it says, the King. Listen, is there some kind of trouble here? What's this all about? There was a moment or two of profound silence on the other end. Bob felt like a man listening for a pin to drop. Bob, my boss has authorized me to offer you $300,000 for the bike, payable to you immediately. How about it? Do we have a deal? Can I bring the check to you? Bob, he was so stunned he could hardly speak. I'll have to think about it, he stammered. He hung up the phone and let himself slump slowly to a sitting position on the kitchen floor. The next day, Bob got a call from a late-night show host. And he explained who he was, and he had this thing about Harleys. And he offered Bob $500,000. And the king, of course, was none other than Elvis Presley. The serial number had been that clear, and the engraved legend under the seat had removed all doubt. The bike Bob had redeemed from the scrap pile for $35 had once been owned by the king of rock and roll. And it was worth $500,000 at that time. At the very least, that's what it was worth. After all these years of seeking the big fine to make that big killing of getting the prize, Bob finally found it. But he hadn't even recognized what he had. It goes to show truly one man's junk is another man's treasure. The value of the motorcycle, of course, wasn't in the metal of the parts. It didn't even run. The value had nothing to do with the bike's beauty, what it was made of, or how well it was performed. What was the value then? It was all tied to the fact that it had been once owned by the king. He had touched it, ridden it, taken pride in it. And in the value of our culture has attached to Elvis Presley approaching deity state or status transferred to his motorcycle. You know, there was people willing to pay a small fortune for the privilege of saying, I own Elvis Presley's motorcycle. And there were several of them. One of them was the one that was given to him by his wife. And that's the one that Harley Davidson's bought and restored. And people ask, well, how much did you pay for it? And we're not going to tell you. $4 million? Lady goes, no, we can't tell you. So probably paid more than $4 million for the bike. Bob didn't realize he had something of great value. He hadn't a clue about the bike's previous owner. He just saw something cheap on the market, an opportunity for a little profit. What he found out, of course, was that ownership was by far the most important truth about that old Harley. In fact, ownership was everything. And what it is that speaks most forcefully about your value and mine, what speaks about us? Our value. Is it what we're made of? Is it based on our job title, our economic status? Is it determined by what we can do and how we perform? Have you ever sat and felt particularly useless? Blue Monday and all. You feel just about as valuable as a yellow $3 bill. Believe me, that's no time to be leafing through a brochure on the value of the human body. When you are needing something to pick you up, it will really cheer you up. I think the grand total of all the ingredients comes to a little over $1. That's what's in us. Apparently there's enough lime in the body to whitewash one chicken coop. There's life purpose for you. There's enough potassium to fire one toy cannon. Enough sulfur to rid one dog of fleas. Enough fat on some people for one medium bar of soap. Enough phosphorus to make 3 matches. Enough iron to make a 12-penny nail. And enough gas to fill a quart jar. And there's water too. And of course, water is free. Where then is my value? Where is your value? If all the ingredients of my physical body are worth about the same as a cup of bad coffee, what keeps me from feeling worthless? Does it depend on what I can do? You know, I have some gifting and training, as we all do, to do certain things. And so everyone here does that. If I don't have my present job, I could earn a living doing something else. Work is honorable, and I have the 2 hands God has given me to perform certain tasks that are more or less valuable to other people. But what if I lost both my hands in an accident? What would I be worth then? And what about the mother or dad who had multiple strokes, was left unable to speak or to walk? Were they any less valuable to us? What if I was affected with Alzheimer's disease and lost most of my memories? What if I had a mental illness that put me in the state hospital? What if I had been born as a Down syndrome baby? And again, I'm not putting anybody down. These are just questions of value. Would my value be less? Would I be less important? What brings such great value to our life isn't what we're made of or what we look like, what our IQ might be, or what we can accomplish. What gives me a sense of worth and significance is that I belong to God. I have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, purchased by great suffering and price. You know, He owns me. He lives within me. He's touching me in so many ways, and nothing can change that. Nothing can separate me from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus, my Lord. And the same with each one of you. You know, someone once said that the Americans know the price of everything and the value of nothing. In our country, a Van Gogh painting sold for $82.5 million. I wished I could throw paint up on a picture like that and get just $500,000. A baseball card sold for $12.6 million. And again, the value of who was on it. A sports car, 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, went for $142 million. That's not yours. No. You can get close to that, right? Okay. And a baseball player. No, let's say it's a basketball player, because I couldn't get the final numbers on the baseball player. But the basketball player signed a contract that pays him $55.7 million per season. What's his value? What does he give back to society? Yet while we place such high value on temporal and trivial, what causes men and women to kill, handicap, or unwanted babies while they're still in their mother's wombs? They don't understand or won't acknowledge the infinite value God places on those babies. What causes a young woman to go off to college and give herself away to the first guy who comes along with a fast car and a line of bologna? She doesn't understand her priceless value. She will do anything and give herself to anyone to make herself feel valuable and treasured, even if only for a night. You know, Jesus spoke very clearly to the issue of personal value, but did it in such a way no one expected or had probably ever heard before. For his object lesson, he spoke about birds and hair. You know, sparrows were the first century equivalent of snack food. I don't think I'd want to have that for snack food, but in the New Testament time, people didn't have potato chips, pretzels, buffalo wings, or Snicker bars, but they did have vendors around the temple of Jerusalem selling crunchy roasted sparrows, and I guess that was adequate. Now, I've never tried one myself, so I can't quite make a comparison. Whether you think about the culinary use of sparrows, they were plentiful and cheap. And as the Lord Jesus did so often in his ministry, he took a common object from everyday life and employed it to make a point. Here's what he said in Matthew 10, 29 through 31 again. Matthew 10, 29 through 31. It says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear you not, therefore. You are more valuable than many sparrows." In the Gospel of Luke, Luke 12 and verse 6. Luke 12 and verse 6. He said in Luke 12 and verse 6, "Are not 5 farthings sold for one? Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings? And not one of them is forgotten before God." Did you notice the variation in price? In Matthew, they were sold 2 for a penny. In Luke, Jesus said they're sold 5 for 2 pennies. You know, I'm not a great mathematician, but I know if you can buy 2 sparrows for a penny, you ought to get 4 sparrows for 2 pennies. Why the discrepancy? I think that simply reveals what a small value culture placed on those birds. 2 for a penny here, 4 or 5 for 2 pennies there. What does it matter? They're just dumb little birds. Who cares about a sparrow? We'll throw in an extra one at no charge. Yet God said, "I know when every bird falls from a tree." There isn't a sparrow in the history of the earth that has escaped my notice. Who cares? Well, God does. Who's counting? God's counting. Now, if he watches with great concern the comings and goings of a sparrow, then how much more does he value your life and mine? In the same passage, Jesus affirms that every hair on our head is numbered. And I've heard some say regarding this passage is that blondes have more hair with 145,000. Brunettes are second with 120,000. And redheads come in last with 90,000. You know, who's keeping track of such trivia, you ask? God does. From his point of view, each hair has its own personalized individual number. He knows when number 587 comes out of your brush, he sees number 132,401 when it slides down the drain. Why does he choose to know such things? Well, it's really no problem. He just knows everything. Yet Jesus used this illustration to drive home a point. No matter what value everyone else may place on you or me, God is deeply interested in and concerned about every detail of our lives. And he values us highly. How highly does he value us? We are worth a son to him. As Paul said in Romans 8, 31 through 32, Romans 8, 31 through 32, tells us, verse 31 of Romans 8, what shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spares not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? There's some singers, Bill and Gloria Gaither. They have a song that says, but the one who knows me best loves me most. He knows everything I've ever done, everything I've said, and everywhere I've been, but he still loves me. Over in Psalms 27, verse 10, Psalms 27, verse 10, if no one else values us, he values us. If no one else cares whether we live or die, God cares profoundly. David recognized that when he wrote in Psalms 27, verse 10, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Is my value less if I'm rejected by my father and mother, by my children, my spouse, by my own brothers and sisters? No. Even though these things would bring me great sorrow and grief, my value is not set by anyone other than God. I am treasured by my Creator and Savior, and that is a truth that will endure forever. Peter reminds us in 1 Peter 2, verse 9. 1 Peter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praise of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I used to think the word peculiar meant that just that. In other words, to be a Christian, you had to be a little weird, dress funny, and act a bit strange. But a closer look at the King James term peculiar reveals its true meaning. We are a private, special treasure, possession of God. We're privately owned, purchased by him. His mark and his seal are upon us. We too, are engaged with the words, the King.